Welcome everybody to Axioms on Trial. Sorry for that little delay there. We are doing an early show today, so probably not any. Well, we got one. I just saw one jump over, so we probably won't have any viewers at the beginning here. So this is probably for people in the future. If you are new to the channel and you have not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. All that stuff helps us in the algorithm. Everybody's been really awesome at that. I don't even think me and Cease would think there'd be like 1,000 after a year. Anyway, so we're already on good pace from our considerations. So we appreciate that. Today's conversation is going to be on materialism. It's kind of impromptu like most of our episodes, so there's not a lot prepared. The only thing that's really prepared is a clip that Cease has sent to me. I have not watched it unless someone sent it to me in the past and I've seen it and just forgot about it. I'm unaware that I've seen it. So it's about a 28-minute video. Might not get through the whole thing. I'm not really under any time constraints unless the workers come to my house and decide to make a bunch of loud noise. In that case, I'll mute a lot. But we should be able to get through the full video, I think. But Cease, yeah, before we start the preamble about materialism, our positions, where we kind of stand, since you kind of brought this up to me, why don't you elaborate to everybody your thoughts for this episode?
Yeah, first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Okay. Which, by the way, we are selling T-shirts in the future called "Can you hear me?" Because I think that's me and Cease's quote of like, I don't know if it's on the show or just between us, but it seems like I'm always saying, "Can you hear me?" and he's always saying that to me. And it feels like we're saying that on the show when our mics are going bad. So we'll be having shirts saying, "Can you hear me?" soon, I think. But anyway, sorry, cut you off.
Maybe also a shirt that about the failures of our technology.
Yeah. Our technology sucks shirt coming soon.
So what was I going to say? Yeah, I haven't fully watched the video yet. I guess my position is that I don't even really know what people mean when they say that there are, like, when people talk about the immaterial as a thing, like as a kind of sphere of reality. Even if such a thing was possible, I don't know what grounds we would have to talk about it or understand it or have any frame of reference for it. I think, and I was telling you this backstage before we went on, I just watched Pine Creek's interview with Gary Habermas. And it's mind-boggling to me that Habermas said any of what he said with the confidence that he said it. Like, I would love to have him on the show.
We almost called an audible at the line and said, "Hey," and if anyone unfamiliar with audible and football language, we almost pivoted to that potential conversation just to go live at the beginning of that and go through the video, but still in the cards. So
yeah, well, I definitely want to do it for the next episode because it was just hearing what I was hearing, which is mind-boggling to me. Point being is that, like, I've never expressed the position that I know the supernatural doesn't exist, or there's only the material, or God can't exist. Like, I'm open to whatever. It's just that I don't see any convincing reason to accept any of these premises. And so I can look at the limitations of materialism as a position, and we can discuss those limitations, but nowhere in that process are those reasons to accept other positions that I think are even more problematic, like dualism, for example. And so I would say that, so this video that we're going to go over now, I think his name is Michael Egnor. And I think if I'm not mistaken, he's like an intelligent design person. You're muted. You were still muted.
Yeah, I'm still muted. It wouldn't be an episode of Axioms if I didn't mute. By the way, T-shirt's coming soon. Mike's muted. So Egnor, from my recollection of Egnor, is through just watching some debates with him. And he did a debate with Matt Dillahunty, who just kind of made appeals to consequence and appeals to like his assessment of what all atheists are, which just seemed to be I'm not going to take a de facto view that because you're a theist or a Christian that you don't have good considerations, or like you're not at least attempting to make good arguments. But this is a shining example of like the majority that seemingly want to at least project that to people, right? Before maybe I'll give them the chance, maybe I get to know them, and that was a bad day. But it was a really bad day, and seemingly it's been a lot of bad days for him, because it seems to be a reoccurring theme in his debates that he's not really concerned about the arguments as much as he is concerned about appeals to consequence, or appeals to like the character of what he assesses to be all atheists, which seems to be a thing of his. But to digress, I actually really quick, I'll let you finish your point if you have a point there with Egnor. But subsequent to like finishing the Egnor talk, before we get into the video, I want to kind of get into a discussion in our positions, where you lay, where I, have my kind of position, whatever my position is, and see if that kind of helps the audience and people that are new or former viewers to see where our positions might have changed. So I would want to start with you and just ask you, like, in kind of the domain that most people who are familiar with the literature, the boxes, so to speak, are you still a non-reductive physicalist, a reductive physicalist, a limited materialist? What's kind of your position?
Part of the problem is that I haven't found a label that I think accurately describes what it is that I'm saying. I thought non-reductive physicalism was it, and then I read some descriptions of that actually suggest that there is some kind of ontological difference between certain descriptions and others, and I don't think that there is. So I don't quite know how to define myself in that context. I would say the following, that I think that ontologically, everything is material. I don't really understand what it would mean.
Can I butt in to ask you to be pedantic? Would you say first, would you just commit to monism? Right.
Yes, I would commit to monism, and I would say that when we're describing the material, we're saying two things. We're talking about objects in the world and the relationship among those objects in the world. So there is some leeway where people could talk about, well, maybe the relationships are some form of abstraction. But even then, I think ultimately we're talking about the relationship of physical phenomena. But what I would also say, however, is that I don't, by physicalism, I don't.
So I was going to actually ask you, just like to be more pedantic, what you mean by physical.
Yeah. I mean, all that exists. So, like, for example, when I talk about space and time, those are just descriptors. It's not that they're objects in themselves. They're almost like adjectives or requirements for what we talk about when we're referring to existence. Like, something exists in the world, has a spatial and a temporal existence. And so what I don't mean is that I can give a mechanistic description of something and have that capture the entirety of the phenomena. I agree with people like what's his name? Let me just make sure that I have the right guy here. I think I talked about this last time. One second. Yeah, right. I agree with Thomas Nagel when he writes in his paper, "What's it like to be a bat?"
Sure.
Like, I agree with him that there is no mechanic explanation of, echolocation or the way in which bats operate that will give us the experience of what it's like to be a bat. Like there's a subjective limitation there. I'm never going to have access to that experience. I'm also, if I'm a colorblind person, there's no explanation of the way in which light works with eyes and that kind of explanation.
Sure.
It's going to give me the experience of color. So that's not what I mean when I talk about things being ontologically physical. But people use those examples to kind of undermine physicalism and say, well, therefore, physicalism is missing something because it can't capture phenomena on that level. And I want to say that they're confusing a failure of language and a limitation of subjective experience with what is ontologically at the base of reality. It could just be the case that, yes, it's still all physical, but some organisms lack the physical systems to have certain kinds of experiences. If there was something behind a cord.
Well, so hold on, let me ask you there though, because for me to like say that it's just an organism that lacks the physical system is just to me to say that it's reducible to the physical system.
So I think what I would say is that experience,
right, because I don't know that you're a reductive physicalist. So that would be an odd type of statement.
I'm not. Well, the reductive physicalist thinks that we can just use language. Like a reductive physicalist is going to say, when I describe the process of color, that is all that there is. And I want to say that that's completely ridiculous. Like that can't be the case, because the experience, like in the example I gave with the colorblind person, like Mary's room, the famous example.
I was gonna ask you. Well, with Mary's room, it's really just the idea: does Mary learn anything when she steps outside? I mean, do you think
she doesn't learn the experience of color? She doesn't learn the actual what that experience is like. But that doesn't undermine the notion that all of this is ultimately physical. It just shows that she doesn't have the access to the subjective experience. And so there's a difference here between a failure of language.
Sure. But I guess what the argument's trying to say, right, is like, if she has access to all the physical facts, that should subsume the qualitative experience.
No, because that's assuming that the description are all the physical facts. And I'm saying that the experience is something that exists beyond the description. The phenomena is something that exists beyond the mere description. But the description is not synonymous with the whole of physical reality. That is the error that critics of materialism are making. They think that the description is everything that is made by.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I have a couple of things. One I want to ask you with Nagel.
Yeah.
Because you agree with Nagel, but like clearly you don't agree with Nagel's
conclusion.
Like no. Nagel. Well, I mean, so like you agree with Nagel. I'm not saying like the part I'm about to say is contentious with what you agree with. I think there's no issue with you agreeing with what you agree with. But you wouldn't agree with like Nagel's further considerations, right? That like materialism isn't going to provide for some explanation of life due to like in virtue of the explanations, right? Because I think what Nagel's idea there is that like you're gonna have to provide some type of like adequate explanation at which it's not just chancy as opposed to expected outcome, right? I think that's like the main idea. So if that's the case, right, you clearly don't agree with Nagel's assessment there that like materialism doesn't provide for the sufficient or adequate or whatever the terminology.
Well, but I think the issue is that him and I think I take a different view of what I mean by materialism, perhaps, because I think he means by materialism, I think he and other people are making the mistake of thinking that materialism is synonymous with the descriptions of some physical facts. And what I'm saying is that is ultimately inadequate. That it's not it's not about.
So you're not going to take a reductionist view, like, you know, you're going to say. Let me just ask you point blank, like, are you going to find issue with an analytic or synthetic reduction to, say, in like intentional states, right? Kind of like, which we'll get into here, which is Bill Gromy's type of.
Well, what I would say is that I don't think that the language in the description of the phenomena is synonymous with the phenomena. It can't be reduced on that level. That doesn't mean there is some other ontological reality out there that is beyond the physical. I'm expanding the notion of physical to be more than what people have previously thought it was.
Sure. I don't want to hold your toes.
Example.
Well, hold on. I don't want to hold your toes to the fire, like in like an uncharitable way or something, obviously. But I'm genuinely curious because the objection seems to be some language issue there, right? So could you formulate what that objection is, like? Because I just kind of want to capture that, and then once we get into the more Frege, more Pincer argument, which, by the way, I don't think you're a reductive physicalist, but I just want to encapsulate this because I don't think language will be relevant, and so I guess that's my initial thought.
Hey, Eddie. I see Eddie in the audience. No, I think language is extremely relevant because that is the.
Well, I mean, it's relevant. I'm just saying I don't think that's what, at least what I'm going to present, is going to attack, right? Like,
sure.
It's going to attack more of like sense reference, but so I'm sorry. So would you like state the objection? I just kind of want to like write it down.
Right. So I'll say it again. So the objection against physicalism from most people is that the physical descriptions of something like color are not going to give the colorblind person the experience of color. Therefore, it seems like the experience itself is something that is beyond the physical, that somehow the naturalism doesn't capture the totality of what is going on.
Would you like the term like above and over and above? Like,
I'm sorry. Say that again.
So, like from what I'm understanding, the physical descriptions don't give rise to the experience. Therefore, the experience is over and above physical descriptions, or something like that.
The point is that the experience is not reducible to the physical description.
Okay. So this is my issue. Okay, so maybe I just say this. So I think I'm interpreting this the way I want to say it now. The physical descriptions you give about the facts isn't what we're talking about when we want to reduce it to its ontology, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Like that's the error there,
right?
Potentially.
Well, that's my point. Is that
so then we have an error on two different spectrums then, because I'm on a different side, I feel like, than you.
Right. So yeah, maybe we can get into where the differences there are. But what I would say is that the failure to capture the phenomena to the language is not a defeater for the concept of materialism. Like if there is, and this was the example I was going to try to give earlier.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I don't mean to. What was the statement? I'm trying to. So the phenomena. What?
The fact that phenomena cannot be reduced to the linguistic description of an experience. So the fact that the experience is not reducible to the words, like with the colorblind.
Yeah. So right there is I guess the contention that someone's going to raise with you, and the one that I'm going to raise. It's not the reduction to the language; it's the reduction of the ontology itself of the actual physical facts, right? The natural facts. Regardless, like I can use grunts that could Let me put it this way: in a possible world, I could use the right language that is, one-to-one correspondence with the physical facts, right?
But no, I would say that that's actually in principle not possible.
It's not an issue of that. It's an issue of even if we have the right utterance to encapsulate the right physical fact, the idea is going to be that you have this issue of reduction to the ontology of physical facts, right? Not the language that's imputed, right?
I would say that it's actually impossible in any world.
Well, you're going to have to use language, obviously.
Yes, but the language is always.
What my point of the thought. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the point of the thought experiment to keep in mind is that the language in this thought experiment is on a 1-to-1 ratio with the ontology. Like we can describe what the physical facts are, right, with the right language. The idea is that the normative facts, right, if we can describe those with the right language, like oughts, right, and that encapsulates goals and things like that, and we have on a 1-to-1 ratio the normative language employed for encapsulating normative facts and a 1-to-1 ratio for the language encapsulating physical facts, the person's objection is going to be, now we're left with the ontology of normative to physical, right? That reduction is going to be a problem.
Right. So that's where you and I disagree. I don't think
Okay.
there's a problem in reducing oughts to physical facts.
Okay, so I feel like we've potentially made a lot of progress in just that point there.
And we've
So now we
that
just know our
conversation,
disagreement.
and yeah, but we've also had a discussion in the
We do. Maybe I'm not recognizing that we've made this
what
kind of
that is our
recognition already.
difference in
But
the
in philosophy of
conversation.
mind, this seems different because it
I think
seems
it's the
your
same problem.
contention is of language, but like if I posit to you a possible world, right, where we have a 1-to-1 ratio for
So can I
normative
stop right
lang-
there? Because I actually think that's
sorry, go
not
ahead.
possible. I think in principle, what I'm saying is that the language is never going to be able to match the 1-to-1 ratio to the totality of the ontology. Like,
sure. So then my just question then is, what's the logical contradiction? What's the bar?
what do you mean? What's the bar?
What's the entailed contradiction? Like, why couldn't you have language? So right, like if I posit a possible world, right, where we have a 1-to-1 correspondence of language to the physical facts and a 1-to-1 correspondence of language to the normative facts, and now we're just left with the reducibility of normative ontology to the physical, and your roadblock is to say we can't do that, then you've prevented a logical bar, which is to say there's some contradiction. There's some reason we can't. It's impossible to do that, but I don't know what's the proposition and the conjunction of its negation, right?
It's the nature of language itself that is the problem. It's like trying to use a tool to do more than what it's capable of. The reason why it can't, the language itself can't, what's the word I'm looking for? Encapsulate all of the phenomena is for the same reason that we observe in with the colorblind example, that phenomena comes before the language. So automatically the language is going to be removed from the thing you're describing. Like the thing you're describing is never going to, the description is never going to be the thing itself. It's just a matter. It's not saying there's a logical contradiction.
Sure, I guess maybe like when I say 1-to-1, what I'm saying is that it encapsulates the right. Like if I talk about, like some precise mathematical measurement of something, right? Like it encapsulates. Oh, like let me put it this way: a triangle that's 3 centimeters, right, on each side, with the measurements in place, is going to encapsulate, right, the actual analytic facts that it's still a a 3-sided object enclosed on a plane, right? So the physical facts that I could get in correspondence will directly be in relation, where I don't know why language there would be an issue.
But talking about a mathematical object, I mean, I'm not saying that the language doesn't encapsulate anything. I'm saying the language encapsulates it to a point and then falls short of something more fundamental, which is the experience itself. Like I said, go back to the marriage groom example. Mary doesn't learn the experience of color by being told the mechanics of color. It's just not ever going to happen that way, because the phenomena and the experience of color is something that takes place.
You don't think the mechanics are descriptive?
No, I think the mechanics are descriptive, but the mechanics are incomplete to the totality of the experience. The mechanics, I'm not saying the mechanics aren't corresponding to anything. Of course they do. They're meaningful and they're valuable, they're important. But I'm saying that it's incomplete. It's an incomplete picture. The mechanics in those descriptions are not going to give you the experience of red. That's the point. of Mary's room.
Well, so I mean, it seems like your objection then, and I'm playing a lot more devil's advocate, obviously, but it seems like your objection is going to be, it seems like you would cut off a lot to just say, if Mary had known all the physical facts, then she just would have the experiential.
No, she would have to have the experience. She would have to have the capacity to have the experience that's independent of knowing how it works or what the physical facts are. The experience is the experience. And then knowing the physical facts or the mechanics of the process might help her understand an aspect of the experience in much farther depth than she would otherwise have had. But it's not the description of red that's going to give her the experience of red. It's the experience of red that's going to give her the experience of red. That fundamentally, that is what's going to give her the information. It's the experience itself.
Okay.
And what I'm saying, yes.
Well, oh no. Well, no. Go ahead. Finish your thought, because I'm not going to try to apply an objection so that we, for the sake of the show, we move on to my position on it, and then we move into the actual clip. So I want you to actually finish your thought.
The point I'm making is that I actually agree with the objection against physicalism that a certain kinds of descriptions fall short of giving us the experience. That's fine with me. I agree with that because of the way that I look and understand language as a tool. What I'm saying is that this isn't a problem for ontology. This isn't a problem for me saying that ultimately reality is physical at the base.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way. This was the example that I was going to try to give earlier. The fact that I might walk down a street and there's a corner, right, and I can't see what's behind that corner. Like there is a limitation there subjectively, where I don't have the experience of what is behind that corner. Doesn't suggest that somehow what's behind the corner is going to be something non-physical all of a sudden. There isn't still going to be street there to observe once I get to that point on the road. So what I'm saying is that these criticisms are addressing real linguistic and subjective limitations that are real, but that are not a defeater for physicalism.
Okay.
They're just a fact of the matter.
Okay, so you're not. So let me just ask you point blank before we get into the next part to kind of segue. Are you going to have an issue with? Are you going to say? Let me just say. Will the naturalist? Will the materialist fail at a reduction analytically or synthetically to the physical facts from an ontological basis, right? Like,
in what context? In the context of telling us of a one-to-one ratio between the description and the experience?
Sure. I mean, well, I guess I can't apply that because you're just going to reject that, right? I mean, you're just going to reject that that's even a possible. My issue is that I don't know what the identified contradiction is still, right? But I don't want to.
But I think we
have to go on for a while to obfuscate from the other stuff we got to do. But I am concerned about like what's the bar to prevent that, right? Because it seems, at least from my perspective, I'm not really bought into metaphysical necessities like in maybe other ways people are. I'm when it comes back to something not being the case, I just want to know what the actual contradiction is, because
I think the bar is what language is. Like the bar is the nature of language itself. I don't see, the thing is, I think
that's a language bar. I'm asking like what the logical bar would be. Like, what's the actual like object or contradiction entailed from a world where there's an actual correspondence of language to the physical facts and a language that's correspondent to the normative facts. I mean, some people might argue that we do encapsulate that, right? So like
they would have to
like
resolve
the
Mary's
objection you have won't suffice them, right? Unless you provide some entailed contradiction in their view, right?
Yeah,
Because
so
you're not going to. wouldn't satisfy them unless that was the case, I feel like.
So I mean, I think part of the issue here is that, like, I don't think that the end all to philosophy is that kind of approach. Like, is there necessarily a logical contradiction? Um, for those people to claim that that the language corresponds to a 1-to-1 ratio, they would have to claim that Mary, who's colorblind, now has the experience of red by having it described.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to object, but my issue is like the whole thing is that I'm talking about in a possible world. For it to not be a possible world would entail that it's an impossible world, which would entail a logical bar or contradiction, right?
Yeah, I think
so that's my issue. It's like, because in virtue of saying it's not a possible,
something can be sound and valid, right?
The 1-to-1 ratio of language to, so let's retract, especially for people that might be just coming into the chat now. If I posit, look, in this possible world, we have a 1-to-1 ratio of the language to the physical facts, language to the normative facts, and now the idea is like, what's the actual reduction from the normative to the descriptive ontologically, right? Like, what's that reduction like? The criticism that you applied seems to be like a that we can't invoke possible worlds, but the only way to say, the way that I interpret, the only way to say that possible world doesn't exist is to say there's some logical contradiction, right, entailed by that world, right? And so then it would just be, what's the proposition, and then the conjunction of its negation, which is just to say what's P and not P.
But you can have logic that is sound but not valid in the way that it actually relates to the world. The point I'm making is that this is an issue more fundamental. Like, you're already, when you talk about logic in that way,
mm-hmm.
You're kind of already, I'm saying something more fundamental about the tool itself. You're already within the rules of the tool that you're trying to project into the world. And I'm saying that there's something more there's an issue that's more fundamental there. I'm saying that it's I don't think I'm saying that it's not, I don't know how to phrase this. I think Sparta maybe he's saying that it's metaphysically impossible, not logically impossible.
So that encapsulates my issue, is that I don't think that does anything other than collapse into logical impossibility. Merely the fact that someone could say that something's metaphysically necessary is like just an intuition that somebody has. There's nothing, like, I don't know, for something like, the only thing that's demonstrated to be impossible is in virtue of, like, you accept classical logic, right? P and not P can't be true. You're not a dialetheist. P and not P can't be true. So in the standard of which, like, that most people agree in the conversations, the only way that it can be instantiated to be an impossible world from the semantics of, like, possibility is just to say it's impossible in virtue of some logical contradiction, right? Like, I could say, in a possible world, a squared circle doesn't exist because it's just logically contradictory, right? And so that, like, but it's not like in virtue of its metaphysical necessity of what a square and a circle are or something like that.
But it's in virtue of the limitation of what conceptually those things are. By the way, I just want to say to Eddie, I got it backwards. He's right there. I got the two things.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see what he said. How can it be sound without being valid? Validity is required. Yeah, you have to have some valid set of inference.
Yeah, so
if I didn't hear that, I just knew what you meant when you said it, or I just
The point I'm making is that, it is a limitation of the tool itself. When you're talking about logic and contradictions, you're kind of not addressing the more fundamental problem of the tool itself as kind of being incomplete in what it can do. Like, I'm looking at the tool of language and what its limitations are. And again, for you to say that there's a possible world, you have to show how language could give the experience of someone who lacks the capacity to have that experience. Like, you're thinking a language is coming before the experience. For you to say that there
No,
isn't
I'm talking about language being able to be applied, like, maybe not one-to-one, but admittedly, one-to-one might not be the best, but I would want to say if we have language that encapsulates what you just mean analytically by the statement or the utterance.
the analytics are not what give you the how is that ever going to be in correspondence to the experience itself?
Well, sure. So the criticism that I've been wanting to focus back on is precisely not the language, right? It's precisely the ontology. The issue of language is like, so maybe I could formulate this better, because the objection seems to be, when I posit, what if we have a possible world with a one-to-one ratio of language to the physical and language that describes the oughts of normative language? Maybe the better way to phrase it is to say, I'm gonna have to like maybe possibly take time to actually think about this before I phrase it, but
maybe we can go back to it.
Yeah, we can. And I think I'm on the cusp of it, so I'm gonna attempt it. Maybe
what I'm trying to tell you is that the criticisms of naturalism and physicalism and materialism tend to be criticisms about the failure of language and what they think is entailed by those failures.
Yeah, so thank you for saying that, because that actually helps me get back to my thought, which was, in a possible world, right, where there's just, right, like, say our language is potentially incoherent, right? In that world, right, where we just don't have concerns about reducing the normative language and that being concerned. Ontologically, in that world, like, is there a reduction to the normative to the physical? Like, because clearly, like, regardless of whether or not we could communicate that, if you even take it to be language is secondary, appeal to consequence will not matter, right, to the actual state of affairs of whether or not you can reduce the normative to the physical, right? Because if you just admit in your argument that this is secondary, then appeal to consequence of how we do it will be irrelevant to whether or not there is actually a reduction of the normative to the physical absent language, right? Do you track what I'm saying there?
I'm not positive. I don't see how.
Let me put it a better way. Your objection is constitutive of using language, right? Like, we have to use language in this dialectic, right?
Well, it's not my objection. It's not my objection.
No, it's not you. I'm just saying this objection.
Mm-hmm.
But if I remove language, right, and we just talk about whether or not the ontology can be reduced to the physical, right? Like, clearly we'll have to use some form of language, but it's just the idea of whether or not that the normative reduces or not, right?
Yeah,
like,
but the problem is, what are you defining as physical now? This is the issue, is how are you defining physical as opposed to how they're defining physical, as opposed to how I'm defining physical? Like, what is that? What are you saying when you say the sentence, we can reduce the physical?
Yeah, so I'm talking, and this actually segues probably pretty well into the next thing. I'm gonna segue that into, like, things like intentional states, desires, beliefs, hopes, those types of things. Like, clearly that's a distinct matter from the physical, right? Like, there's some, and that's just to encapsulate the experiential quality versus, like, the physical quality, right?
But again, that's already there. I don't make the distinction. I don't think that there is a distinction in the way people think.
Sure. So the distinction is going to be, like, causal dispositions versus, like, a goal that I could intend that I would be in accord with or not in accord with, right? So, like, if I knocked over, like, if I knocked over my cup or something like that, like, I wouldn't say, like, it intended to fall next to my computer, but it failed because it fell next to my cat, right?
No,
like,
but
clearly there's a causal disposition there. There's a distinction between that and whether or not I intended to knock the cup over so that it hit my cat versus hitting my computer, right? There's
But
clearly
they're
a
both.
distinction between that, right?
But the distinction is only in which phenomena you're describing. It's not a distinction in ontology. Like if I'm a monist, ultimately both scenarios are going to be ultimately of a physical nature. The intentions might be different, or some of the descriptions of the relationships among what actually took place is going to be different because they're going to be different phenomena. But it's not going to be that one is physical and the other one isn't. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Otherwise, you're not a monist. Like if you want to say that there is a set of facts or descriptions.
No, because so like you could just be yeah, I mean clearly you could be a monist and just say that the normative doesn't reduce, right? Like the intention. So maybe we just
we'll have to go back.
Yeah. Well, we will, but this I think goes perfectly into this, right? So this formulation that I listed is actually from I believe Ask Yourself in an AMA with Bill Grommy, Kill Bill Grommy. Premise, and it's just kind of, I'll put it up on the screen. I'll put it up on the screen so everybody can see. Hopefully if it fits. It won't fit there. So let me actually just stop my screen and share. So this is going to be kind of just like an underline. Like the reason why I point this out is because I think Ask Yourself's point in the AMA to see the purpose of the argument elucidates a lot for maybe anybody confused. Document.
I guess we'll play the video after this.
Yeah, we can get into the video. It's my issue is that it doesn't seem. Yeah, we did this. It does take a left turn. Whoops. I don't know that I can share it. I'll just read it out. Hopefully, if you're following along and you really care that much, you can just type this out as I say it, because I have too many things up on my screen. Okay, so let me share this. This is the thing I wanted to get into before we get into the video. So the idea is going to be premise one. Either your account of value is natural or non-natural. So this is going to be geared more towards like the meta-ethical view, but just take the normative here in the same light, right? Just reducing the normative to the physical. So either your account of value is natural or non-natural. Would you agree? It's just like a true dichotomy. Yeah. Okay. Premise two, if your account of value is natural, it will require an analytic synthetic reduction. So that's going to presuppose that you hold to an analytic synthetic distinction. Would you hold to that?
I'm not sure about that one. I have to think about it more.
But... Sure. That's fair. I'm not trying to get you to commit to the premises. So like, you accept the conclusion. I just want to hear what you think. Premise three, if your account of value requires analytic natural reduction, then it's subject to the Morian arm of the Pincer. I might have to elucidate on that, but are you familiar with like the Morian arm of the Pincer? This is where I'll probably have to elaborate on the argument itself.
I forget. I know we've talked about it before, but
sure. So,
it like collapses to ultimate and analytic.
Yeah, so like the idea in the argument, from what I understand, and I'll this is where I will pull up the article that Bill Grommy has. I think it's relevant, and then we can get into the video. So the idea of this argument is going to be like, it's called the Frege-Moore Pincer argument. I'm still relatively new. I've been reading Self-Knowledge and Resentment, but I'm still trying to digest a lot of it and take notes. So the idea behind this is going to be that when you talk about or let me just start with the argument. It's called the more Frege more Pincer argument. So the more arm, what's called the more arm, is going to be relative to G.E. Moore's open question argument. So that is to say, like when someone identifies, analytically, like something like X is good, we could posit something like, A is good because it leads to B. So it could be like, well, okay, why is B good? Well, because it leads to C. Why is C good? It leads to D. Right. So the Moorian arm is just going to be in virtue of the open arm. The open question argument. The Frege arm of the pincer is going to amount to an a posteriori identification, which is to say some like empirical identification. So we talk about like the example Bill Grommy uses, water being H2O. So it's something we come to knowledge. Knowledge about through analysis of the world. So the idea behind this argument is you're going to have an analytic or synthetic reduction, right? The analytic appealing to the Moorian arm, synthetic appealing to the Fregean arm. And so when you talk about when someone says like X is good in the Frege arm, they're going to be appealing to some sense and some reference to what the good is, which will lead you back to the Moorian arm of the pincer, hence why it's called the more Frege more. There's a thing here I wanted to read real quick. Pull that up. If this interests anybody, you can go read about it. And I might be reading out of context. I'm going to start from here. However, there are styles of the argument, essentially the Fregean arguments, which would account against these forms of naturalist reductions. So suppose that a reduction appealed to some a posteriori identity of the form good is X. So now good, by the way, is normative. So like think about this in context of philosophy of mind with just like any normative notion. I take, or at least I'm convinced that intentionality is normative. I was reading about some German philosopher that I can't remember his name at the moment, but that had kind of spoke to this. Probably that's prior to Bill Grommy and other people. But so the idea here is that like intentional states, desires, beliefs, things like that are going to be normative. So when we talk about like good, think about desires or think about like intentional states. So suppose that such a reduction appealed to some a posteriori identity of the form good equals X, where X was some natural property. Now, it is surely possible that someone may, without a rationality, deny that good equals X, just as someone may deny without rationality that Hesperus is phosphorus, or deny that London is Londres, or water is H2O. Mere lack of information about astronomy or geography or chemistry or morals cannot make one irrational. But if someone can coherently and meaningfully say it is not the case that good is X, we must ask what the term good means in this sense. Let the term denote whatever it is supposed to. Let the term denote whatever it is supposed to, given the a posteriori identity. The point is that we need to posit a sense. We need to say that it connotes to find the statement coherent and rational, even if it is false. That shows that even in the identity statement, good equals X, the term good has a sense. Now the question is, what is this sense, or what is the sense capturing? If we say that they are descriptions that further express natural properties, if we were to say modes of presentations which pick out naturalistic states and properties via concepts describing further naturalistic properties, then we are back once again to being vulnerable to the Moore's open arm question argument. For now, good is being given a sense or a meaning or definition which is naturalistic. That is exactly the idea that the Moore's argument had undermined. If we were to say that the descriptions and modes of presentation do not describe or express a naturalistic property, then there is no fully effective naturalistic reduction in the first place. So if the objection that the Moorean argument was fine as far as it went, but did not go as far as enough to overturn more contemporary sort of naturalism, the reply is that with a little help from Fregean arguments, the Moorean argument can be made to go exactly that far. It looks then as if there was something like the Pincer Effect, which disallows any naturalistic reduction of normative notions, whether moral ones or those involved in intentionality, these reductions are either vulnerable to Moore-style arguments or Frege-style arguments. If one thought they were vulnerable to the former, it is only because one was in thrall to naturalism that was susceptible to the latter, and one could not forestall the latter if one appealed to the very sort of thing, meaning sense, which made to the former. So yeah, that ends that. So the idea is just that when you make this idea of like some appeal to like what the sense is, right? We talked about this with the morality thing of like what it means to be good. If like the idea is that you're positing as some like a posteriori sense of reduction or some synthetic reduction, when you say it's good or when you say you invoke this like kind of normative sense, that it's just going to revert back to the analytic.
Yeah, I don't think. I think
if you're non-reductive physicalist, this won't apply to you, obviously, because you're.
Well, I also think that this entire position, I think, makes a mistake about the relationship between language and phenomena as well. I think it's incoherent to think that we can talk about something being the case outside of the physical reality. So to say that we can't derive objective morality because there is some confusion about, well, how do we compare and contrast what value is right? I think all of this is a confusion about. I think it's ultimately a confusion about the role of phenomenology and the way in which we actually talk about this thing. It's almost like they think that the language is where the reality is derived from, as opposed to the other way around. Like, I don't think that these applications. Yeah, we should. CJ asked a question. We should post a link to this paper in the description.
Yeah, I'm and so.
We'll have to go back to that. We'll have to go back to this paper probably.
I don't know that I'm allowed to post where I have access to the full paper, but it would be a shame if someone mentioned a website called Sci-Hub where you could post the link that I'm providing into Sci-Hub so that you get access to the paper. Now, what I want to say is that if you do that, please go out and support Bill Grommy, buy one of his books, purchase the paper, read it. If you like it, buy it, right? I'm not advocating that you do this. I'm just saying there are resources out there that people can do. So just saying that. And that's where the link will be. But yeah, there are resources out there where you can get access to it.
Just to answer this question real quick. He asked, what about intuition as far as morality? Yeah, I think intuition is a big part of it. For me, and you can go back to, we're not going to get into much detail now because we're going to go into this video in a minute, but you can go back to some of our conversations about more realism we've had in the last few episodes. I ground my moral philosophy in phenomenology and what I think the nature of consciousness is, and how we derive values from that, from phenomenology, and why I think there's a spectrum of values where we can actually say why some values are objectively better than others. But yeah, we'll have to probably do a whole episode on this more Frege Pincer paper at some point. But I would say let's get into, holy crap.
I decided to be Harry Potter. I have the cloak of invisibility.
That freaked me out for a second. Let's go into the video for now.
I just always wanted to do that. Yeah, we're gonna go into the video.
That was like a side track of like an hour.
It really was. We probably won't get through. Like I said at the beginning, we're gonna get through this whole video. We're not gonna get through this whole video.
And yeah, I would say that fundamentally, that's what I would say. I'm a phenomenologist first and foremost at this point. So,
Yeah,
which is
so
why I think you and I have some issues, because you take a more linguistic and logic first perspective, and to me it's like all that is secondary to the experience being at the fundamental level, and so we're coming
yeah,
at
I
this
mean, I
completely
like.
different places.
Well, I agree. So like, I'm somebody that's like gonna agree potentially certain logical like I'm not gonna say like classical logic's like like metaphysically necessary or something potentially. Like I'm open to
Right.
like ideas and and like utilization of logic in different circumstances, but I just take a presupposition of classical logic, right? Like that's
Sure.
kind of how I operate there. I'm fine with. So yeah, I do take it to be needing to be in correspondence with like if you violate like non-contradiction and excluded middle or something like
Yeah.
that, or if the view is that like something's impossible, that's what I'm gonna want to ask for, right? I'm gonna want to ask for like where exactly is the contradiction
I don't
entailed,
think
because
any of my
otherwise like this is why I'm not like God, like so like I take positions where I think, and we talked about this on the phone earlier, I take positions where I think like omnipotence or intentional states and the conjunction of those two states, or even just omnipotence alone, results in like modal collapse, which shows like issues with theological perspectives. But I don't like sit there and say like God can't exist, like there's some contradiction in the proposition God exists or something like that, right? Which is what I think would, for me, I guess, is what I feel like would be necessary for me to be like, yeah, there are absolutely no gods, irrespective of like the classical, right? Like I could go, all the ones I've heard don't exist. And that's fine, but I'm not going to derive some contradiction. So I guess my basis is just going to be like, I need some contradiction to say that there any possible world that we invoke for reduction of ontology is limited by language. I don't know that that's like a logical constraint. But I guess
so okay, so let me ask you something.
your issue is just like from a basis of it being secondary.
So
In the first
hold on, let me ask, because I just thought of an example. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I would say I don't think there's actual contradictions in my position, but I do understand what you're saying, that I haven't brought to you a contradiction. But let's just look at a fact, right? Could I build a bridge using a pencil?
Sure, because a bridge is normative, so you could just like make it whatever you want, I suppose.
Okay, could I could I build
I mean, like you're either in accord with like whether or not the bridge's function serves as a bridge, which is normative to me, right? Like it's either in accord or out of accord. So, but that's also gonna depend on what you think a bridge is. So
okay, so let me find an easier example.
sorry, I'm being super pedantic. I now identify normative language differently now. Like I hear things like progress or success or in like certain words where I'm like, that's normative. Like just the fact that we think it's success is just an evaluative standard that you employ doesn't mean that that success is a standard that's universal.
Okay, so accepting the fact that we don't have a clear definition to anything, okay,
Sure, I'm
could
extremely skeptical on normative language, I guess.
Okay, think of a rock, like however you want to define a rock, just like would you say there's a normative problem with talking about a rock?
Well, like well, I mean, no, because we're just gonna say a rock is some natural fact. It's not normative, like, right?
Okay, so
I'm just saying, like, your concept of what a bridge would be, because it's like it's not like a bridge exists. Like,
okay, so let's talk
like
about
a
a rock.
natural fact or something like
Can
that.
can I use a pencil to materialize a physical rock into the world?
No, I don't.
So
No.
was there a logical contradiction? Well, Phil, can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Because my screen is freezing up, so it might kick me off in a second.
no, I can hear you.
Okay. Point is, can you bring me a contradiction between using a pencil and the ability or inability to bring a rock into existence? Like, is there a logical contradiction you can point to?
Yeah.
with me, which is what?
Well, you're talking about identity, right? The pencil is not the rock.
No, I'm not.
A and not A, right?
No, but I wasn't.
If you're okay. You dropped out. I had a feeling that would happen because it happens whenever his thing freezes, but he'll be back. I don't know if I'm tracking right, but if what he's saying is like, could a pencil materialize into a rock? I'm gonna be like, what? No, I don't know that it violates the law of identity. It's like A and not A. Like, I have to. Maybe I'm not tracking the example. We might not have time for Egnors. I don't know. We may not. I'll go ahead and at least give my position of where I'm at on philosophy of mind. Would say I'm skeptical holding any position for sure. Not that I don't think any position. I don't think like all positions aren't valid there or something, but I don't hold to a specific position at the moment because I do have an issue with this reduction, but
Can you hear me?
I don't know if it's not an issue that physicalism can't account for, just being non-reductive, or if maybe a different position
Can you hear me?
Suffice. But
can you hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, my computer just shut itself.
No worries. I have no idea where we were at. You were saying something.
What I was saying, in my example, I wasn't claiming the pencil is identical to the rock.
That's
I was saying, is there a logical contradiction in the idea that the pencil could be a tool that could give rise to a rock? They're separate things. They're separate entities.
No, I don't see a contradiction in a tool giving rise to like sediment forming somehow. Like you could like take a pencil and like use the pencil on a bunch of like, minerals, and then put them in a compacted ball, and eventually it become like what we call a rock, right? I'm a meteorological nihilist, so like I don't think things exist technically with constituent parts, but necessarily.
So I'm confused. You're saying that a pencil could give rise to a rock?
I'm sorry?
You're saying that a pencil could give rise to a rock?
I'm saying that you could use the form of what we call something pencil-wise to formulate like what we call minerals into what we call a rock. Sure, you could use anything. I could take like my Game Boy and do that. Like I could just compact minerals together in some like river, right, where the minerals flow in a direction which accumulate to some.
Okay, I'll be more specific.
Deposit, right? Can
a pencil materialize a rock from thin air?
No, there's no logical contradiction. That's just would be like we don't have any inductive reason to think that's the case.
Right. So but the fact that there is no logical contradiction in that example doesn't mean that it's an actual existential.
Sorry, I thought you were saying like, could I use a tool to like? I was like, yeah, I could do whatever I want to formulate minerals because like things.
No, I'm trying to give you an example of a context in which something isn't a logical contradiction, but isn't something you could say is actually possible in reality.
Yeah, so I feel like you could do a better example of just being like, can I jump over the moon? Over the moon? Is it logically impossible for you to jump over the moon right now? And I'd be like, no. Like there's physical constraints for you to jump over the moon.
So I would say this. So I would say
it's not. But the idea there is that it's not impossible. The idea there is that you can't do it under these circumstances. That's fine. But hold on, that's not impossible.
But if the circumstances are the circumstances, and they're not, those circumstances are unchangeable, then how is it any different than saying?
So what's the analog? So the analog is going to be that you can't. So your idea behind the contradiction was in virtue of the language, right? About you're saying the possible world of which that corresponds you're saying you can't do, but you're not saying you can't do it in virtue of a contradiction. You're saying you can't do it in virtue of the set of circumstances. That's the analog, right?
I'm saying that the tool of language is like the pencil. The pencil is not going to magically give rise to a rock because it's not the kind of tool capable of doing that. It's not that there's necessarily a logical contradiction there. It's just a matter of fact that it can't do it.
Sure. Now, so it's the person was like, you can't do that. It seems to be okay to say that because they're not reducible, right? Not like you can't do it because of some logical contradictions. The circumstances of that they're not reducible. That's fine, but I don't know what it means for the circumstances to not be reducible. And I'm playing way more devil's advocate for the sake of the criticism. Like,
can you still hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, I'm agnostic to, I guess, in a lot of these positions, like I was saying when you were gone, but which I took, if you watch previously, I was a reductive physicalist, so I've changed my position pretty drastically. But
also, real quick, to answer Ed's question, I do think I'm probably somewhere along the Kantian lines there. There may be some differences. Like, I agree with the idea that we can't say that we have full access to ontology. Like, even if we did, we wouldn't know it. Hey, Physics Police, good to see you. But yeah, so
you started playing devil's advocate so hard, I started day drinking. Yeah, no, I am going a lot harder. I mean, admittedly, I don't like to really even put myself in the naturalist position, just because, like, I have issues of, like, what naturalism means in general. But so I have issues that I think Cease would be sympathetic to, with language and what that reduces to, ironically. But more so, like, stripping away the language, it's just the idea of the how you account for these intentional kind of thoughts ontologically. If you're I mean, clearly you're saying they're physical. You're saying they're not reducible in virtue of language, and then you're also adding, what other fucking way would we reduce this,
exactly.
Right? That's a very, very fair criticism. Like, I don't have anything off the top of my head to criticize. It's a more robust view than I think I had previous to, I guess, my considerations. But the issue is that, or not the issue, but the question I guess I would want to ask is, clearly the more Frege Moore Pincer argument just won't apply to you, right? Because it doesn't apply to somebody that's going to agree with the ability. So if you're just saying we're not going to reduce it, right, then clearly you're just going to say, and let me pull up the premise, because you had a contention with the analytic distinction. I think maybe we could do you a bigger favor by saying you're going to say that. So premise 2, when it says, if your account of value is natural, it will require an analytic or synthetic reduction. You're just going to deny that there's a reduction required because potentially you're a reductionist, right?
Right, but the conclusions to be reached from that observation are not what I think a lot of people tend to think should be the conclusions. Like, the not being able to reduce something like morality or something like experience to a certain set of physical descriptions doesn't undermine moral realism, as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't undermine physicalism and materialism, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So just the broader scope of the normative, or like the ought to the is, or the
I hear a booping sound too. I think maybe you're on your end. I think you might be
I don't
something.
know why my mic keeps doing that. Which, by the way, it looks like we won't get to Egnor today.
Let's try to at least get to some of the video.
Do you want to just fucking both put bars of soap in our mouth now and just like move on?
Let's get to the video.
That's fair. So just to put a cap on it, you're clearly you're not gonna be subject to some reduction there. But then obviously your criticisms towards language, but then also you're gonna say in virtue of like what the fuck else are we going to try to attempt to reduce it with? So it's just gonna be kind of constitutive of your view. That's fair. I would have to actually just think about that more.
And also, I do want to give an apology to the audience as far as like the Patreon is concerned, and Physics Police and other people. I know some of them are. We'll get there with the Patreon page. It's a little bit difficult because
we definitely will. Let me just add one thing before we go on, because I think that conversation is really productive. Because as someone like myself who's probably on like the non-reductive camp, I feel like it's a video. I just saw fucking brute facts. Eddie's comment said video. It's a view that might feel like, if I, especially talk to you more in private too, solidifies my view and philosophy of mine in a lot of ways. So, there's a lot there to get into. You were
real quick. Can you hear me better here or from my computer?
Well, I can see you, but it's like you got like the mugshot going on over.
That's gonna fuck with my dissociation here. I don't have three of me there because I'm gonna.
So we got mugshot cease, and we got cease, or we got axiom cease. But this is like
get that shit on there. So which format do you want me to come on here? The phone or the computer? Because my computer is back working now.
You're fine with whatever. I mean, we're getting towards the end of it.
All right, let's play this video
anyway. So, I think those are fair assessments. I definitely would need to talk to you more to flesh that out, or we can just do like what we did with meta ethics, but like 10 parts.
I have like 8 pages.
I think I'm more on board with this than I am. I'm pretty solidified in my anti-realism, but
okay,
there's a chance. I mean, I will say this, Cease, that the more I think that value properties potentially exist, if I come to that conclusion, then it's easy for me to be a realist because I can pinpoint some independent thing. But to me, I feel like that's like, if I can't detect that somehow, I don't really know how that's any different from any other undetectable claim. But
all right, let's play this video and see where this goes.
I'm trying to share it, but for some reason, the audio. There we go. It's like the audio tab won't pop up.
It dates back to the ancient Greeks, and
all right, let's jump back. By the way, we shouldn't give this guy the time of the day. I'm gonna blame this on Cease. Send all your hate mail to cease to know at Axioms on Trial.
Materialism is an ancient philosophy. It dates back to the ancient Greeks, and
because I'm just gonna say, fuck this guy. But anyway, we'll continue.
Viewpoint of Democritus, who was a Greek philosopher, is that the only thing that exists is atoms in the void, and that everything, including the human mind, is reducible to atoms in the void. And in the 20th century, the materialist ideas have been...
I'm going to pause it here. I'm only bringing the meta because that's all he does. In every debate I've ever seen, he just talks about atheist this, atheist that, and I immediately think you're a douchebag when you group people together like that. I'm guilty of it. It's not a good thing to do, right? So I'm just going to individually say, fuck this guy. I'm not grouping him. I'm just saying individually.
Been extended a bit. The behaviorists in the early 20th century believed that the mind was at best irrelevant and possibly didn't even really exist at all. The only thing that actually mattered was the behavior of a human being, the behavior of an organism. That philosophical viewpoint turned out to be untenable. So the viewpoint that the mind was identical to the brain became widely accepted among materialists.
So I guess we start there for a second. I mean, like, what's your thoughts on like identity theory, functionalism, things like that? I mean, I don't think you hold to that, but that's kind of
No,
crazy.
I mean, it's not that I think experience is not ultimately a product of the brain. It's just that looking at the brain is one aspect of a larger phenomenon. It's not like we can look at the brain and see the experience of pain, right? That doesn't mean that pain doesn't come from brains. It just, again, it's a matter of how the totality of the phenomena we're talking about. So again, it's an issue of subjective limitations in language, like I said earlier. It's not that because a brain state doesn't tell us the experience of pain is synonymous with it. It doesn't mean that pain is somehow independent of brains. It's just a confusion of terms.
1960s and 70s, it was called identity theory. And that viewpoint has come to be untenable. Pretty obviously, the mind is not the same.
I think Graham Oppie is an identity theorist or a functionalist. So
I mean, I do think there are problems with identity theory as it's originally formulated.
Yeah, I remember coming to you at some point and saying, "What do you think about identity theory?" And you, I want to say that was like 7-8 months ago, and you expressed some issues with that. I mean,
Well,
do you have them off the top of your head, or?
Well, yeah, like I said,
I know that was a while ago. So.
It's not like we can look at a brain and a part of the brain being stimulated and say that now we have the experience of pain. It's also unclear. We're still unsure exactly how brains work completely. Like there's still some ambiguity there, and certainly neuroplasticity. There's also the issue of animals or like a dog, for example, is structurally different than us in terms of how their brains operate, but we wouldn't say that they don't experience pain because they don't have the exact same brains as we do. So there, I think there are some issues there with identity theory. And I mean, I'm not doing it justice, but we'll go back and do something that's more detailed.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I had talked to you at the time. I think that was more fresh on the brain than 7-8 months later. So I get that. I was gonna say, because remember when I asked you, had a pretty robust response at the time.
I don't know who Stephen Nemes is.
I'm sorry?
Do you know who Stephen Nemes is?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at the comments. No. I'm not. That name is not. Clearly, it's not familiar. I was like, what?
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not familiar.
Everyone who just came in, I hope everybody's doing well.
The thing is the brain. And other theories such as functionalism, which views the mind-brain relationship somewhat akin to the relationship between the software and the hardware.
So that might be... I'm being pedantic, but I want to say that, like, Oppie holds to identity theory, like, and some form of functionalism, which I know people have issues with, like, them holding simultaneously. But I remember in some AMA, he was like, depends on your view. And he doesn't have an issue with that. But so, I don't know that I think that distinction might be worth someone looking into. Just to let me know in the comments if that's wrong. All right.
Of a computer has become quite popular, but the mind is not computation. In fact, the mind is the opposite of computation. Although the brain itself could be described as a computer, the mind is no form of computation. And a theory that is currently very popular among the...
So the brain can be considered computation, the mind can't.
Yeah, I don't know what grounds he's making this distinction.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to... I might be able to understand that with a better analogy. I just, like, to invoke mind and brain is going to dissatisfy a lot of the audience, right? If you're an identity, like he's clearly speaking, if you're talking like an identity theorist and they're just synonymous, right? Like that's one attack, but someone maybe like yourself, who doesn't look at that like on a 1-to-1 ratio is not going to.
I need to see like what is defining these terms to be. So let's see what it says.
I'm being a little pedantic. I'll let it go on.
Materialism is called eliminative materialism. And eliminative materialism is
Precisely, CJ. That's what it feels. It feels very hand wavy.
the viewpoint that there is no such thing as the mind. It's not that the mind is explainable by matter. It's just that the mind doesn't exist at all. And the only thing that exists is matter, and that we are deluded into thinking we have minds. That's a rather radical, strange way to look at things, but it actually is rather popular nowadays amongst materialists. None of these philosophical materialist viewpoints have.
Sorry, I just want to ask you. Since that kind of props us up, what do you think about like Dennett's?
It's the most ridiculous. To deny experience, like to deny qualia, I think is the most ridiculous position in philosophy I've ever heard.
Yeah, I think
like more ridiculous than religion.
Yeah, I think the best way that I've heard it phrased is that you're just engaged in a performative contradiction, right? Like to say that you're denying intentions and beliefs while utilizing the intentions and beliefs.
It's just complete nonsense.
Super performative contradiction. Now, of course, they would just say you're begging the question against the view, but to beg the question against the view seems to require some intentional states and beliefs.
It's just endless cycle.
In this big circle we go, yeah.
Any particular support in science. The scientific evidence strongly suggests that these viewpoints are wrong.
Let's see this.
There are a variety of classic studies of neuroscience that support the viewpoint that some aspects of the mind are not material, and that
Are you aware of any of these? I'm not really familiar with them.
I have a feeling he's gonna go into like near-death experiences. I don't know because I haven't seen this, but he's gonna let's see what he says.
Sure.
refute materialism. The first set of experiments are experiments that show cerebral localization with certain kinds of neurological functions, but not with others. It's been known since the 19th century that for motor and sensory function, there are very specific locations in the brain that seem to mediate those functions. If I move my hand, that is controlled by a specific part of my opposite cerebral hemisphere, and the area is quite discrete. Vision is controlled by a very discrete area in the occipital lobes. However, higher intellectual functions, abstract thought, such as mathematics, such as contemplating.
I'm a little weirded out that and I'm just pulling up papers. I can't know right now. I have to read them obviously, and I want to understand probably half the shit that's said, but probably 99% of it was said. But I'm weirded out that papers would cite some ontological basis other than what's going to be in virtue of some reticular theory or some type of so there's going to be some theory involved that doesn't actually impute some specific ontology in science, right? I don't think that that's going to be the case. They're not going to conclude this can't be accounted for, therefore it's immaterial.
I don't know why.
A really weird thing to say from my perspective.
And again, this is operative of internal biases. He's working backwards. He's trying to prove something, his intuitions, as opposed to seeing whether or not his intuitions actually match reality. I want to address this question real quick. Can you click on it? The physics police wrote it. I can't do it from my phone. He says, what does it mean to deny qualia? I don't think quality exists any more than the process of addition exists. You can perform addition without saying processes or kinds of things that exist. No, so qualia is a fancy word for there being a character to your experience. There is something that it's like to be you. There is something that it's like to have an experience. There's something that it's like to feel hot as opposed to cold. Like there is a qualitative thing there. And those who deny quality are saying that there isn't actually a what it's like. That everything can be just described in terms of a physical description, which again goes back to the beginning of the episode, that this is clearly not true because you can't give a colorblind person the experience of color by telling them the mechanics of color. The experience is something separate. So go back to play the video, I guess.
Ethics, things involved in personality are not localized like that. That is, that there is no calculus center of my brain. There's no addition center of my brain. The brain seems to be necessary, ordinarily, for doing calculus and doing addition and thinking about concepts like justice and mercy and so on. But it's not localizable in any way near the same way that movement and sensation is localizable. The belief that higher abstract thought was going to be localizable was held by materialists in the 19th century, and they developed the theory of phrenology from that.
Who cares? Nobody's saying that to be a materialist, you have to be able to localize with certainty every aspect of human behavior. That doesn't suggest that some notion of immaterial is suddenly more credible. There might be just a way that we don't know how brains work altogether, or that maybe some things aren't localized. That maybe the brain is neuroplastic enough where it's not going to be the case that you're going to have one particular specific area.
So there's a criticism on neuroplasticity against materialism. It's been a couple months for me, but are you familiar with any of those objections?
I don't remember.
We probably have to revisit that. There's some people that argue because of neuroplasticity. So I only say that because, someone might be dissatisfied and go, "Hey, I would actually use that point, against you or something." So
also, Eddie asks how you put a clickable link in chat, and I'm not sure how to do that.
I have no idea. You have to be a mod, and I could give you that privilege, but I log in and all that garbage, so I can do that for you. But I'm also a little lazy at the moment.
I would do it, but I don't know how. Let me see.
Ow, my cat. Put your butt in my face.
Yes, the idea that all of these individual higher intellectual functions had a spot in the brain that controlled them. And phrenology, of course, has been discredited. It's been shown to be wrong. And it was wrong because only certain things in the brain seem to be mediated by the brain. Other aspects of the mind don't have a spot in the brain that seems to give rise to them. The implication there is that they're not really material.
No, that's not the implication.
Material power of being able to reason and use logic.
Pause it.
And frankly, that's
how is that the implication? That's not the implication at all.
I thought that motherfucker was about to piss on me. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So what was said? I was.
He said that because certain features of the brain can't be localized, that therefore the explanation for those features is something immaterial. That's what's implied. Why would that be what's implied? I don't see how does he go logically from the one to the other.
Well, because you didn't know that if I don't understand X, then Y is true is a valid inference, right?
It just doesn't make any sense. That's not
you
how
didn't
it works.
Well, hold on, Cease. Are you telling me right now that you think I don't understand X, so therefore Y is true? You think that's fallacious? You don't think that's you think that's not fallacious? Or like, come on, man.
I'm sorry.
I'm backwards, right? Let me cut the shit. Yeah, the problem I have with this guy is like, one, I said this to you when we got on the air, or before we got on live, was like, this guy doesn't even, like, I've heard from what I've read in the literature from Bill Grommy or anyone else that poses more of a serious threat, in my opinion, to like naturalism or physicalism or whatever it might be. Now you can call that bias, because a lot of those are from an atheist perspective. They don't have this like extra like ontological baggage that like Egnor comes with, where it's like you're just like a snake oil salesman, like selling me something, right? Like, because you go watch this guy, and when he makes his arguments here, like, one, this isn't a valid inference rule. Just to say that we don't have an explanation, therefore it's immaterial, is not a good explanation, right?
Yeah, it's
you could
terrible.
posit we don't have an explanation, therefore
We don't have an
we
explanation.
could maybe consider the immaterial or non-natural or something. That's fine. I think, like, if you took to a reductivist form and you posited that, look, it's either that this can't be reduced from a physical standpoint or that there's something else at play, that's fine. I'm okay with like you positing that, but like the inference rule doesn't deductively follow for you to like soundly conclude, therefore it must be this immaterial thing, right? Because all that you've established that there's options at play, and that's fine. Like, I see no logical contradiction that it could be immaterial. Like, I mean, let me ask you, see, it's like, would you find some logical issue that it could be immaterial?
Well, again, I don't even know what is meant. I think the word immaterial.
No. If we were just being as charitable as possible, like, would you say like potentially there's no logical contradiction there? Maybe that is asking you to commit to a lot. So
Because I have a hard time talking about existence in the context of some notion of immaterial. I actually think this idea of immaterial is incoherent.
My thought process is like, look, like, I don't care if there's a lot, like, or I don't care if like I couldn't identify some contradiction in the notion here, to kind of piggyback on what we were saying earlier in the conversation with your criticisms towards me expressing a contradiction or wanting a contradiction, is that when you don't, in virtue of not being able to actually express some derived contradiction, I'm okay with, look, your explanation could be true the same way, like, Russell's teapot, right? Or anything else, right? Like, that's fine. I have no problem with positing hypotheses ad infinitum, right? That's okay. Right. It's just what you're concluding, like the inference, you're actually applying an inference rule there, which is that therefore it must be immaterial, which could be formulated, right? Look, we could actually apply the inference rules and just show that's just not a valid inference, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about like soundness. I'm just saying it's just not a valid inference.
Yeah, no, I agree. But let's see what else he says, I guess.
A very old dualist idea. It was an idea proposed by Aristotle, an idea as part of Thomistic philosophy. So for thousands of years, dualists have predicted that, and modern neuroscience confirms that.
What?
Back in the 19...
So I'm still trying to figure out what was the first scientific evidence?
He provided this observation that not all aspects of the brain is localized, therefore that is scientific evidence that refutes materialism. Like,
sure. So let me just rephrase. Let me just ask you, I guess, serious questions. Evidence, right, from an empirical standpoint, it's right, like, clearly what we know of, it's inductive, right? Like, that's what we're going to use, right? Okay. So, in virtue of saying, like, scientific evidence number one, shouldn't we expect some, like, inductive evidence of the immaterial and not just there's a gap here we don't understand?
Right? It's just like God of the gaps type of approach.
It's weird because, like, and this is half the reason why I wanted to do this, which was a little unsuccessful in terms of I mean, you presented the show topic, obviously, but why I wanted to do the discussion before was that there's criticisms I think that could be applied, but like so far this ain't it. What's the term that people say now? Like the kids are saying, this ain't it, bro. Like that.
In the 60s,
This ain't
Roger Sperry, who is a prominent neuroscientist, did a series of studies on patients who had had split brain operations. And these are patients who had severe epilepsy, in which an epileptic.
Shannon Q. 516 in this video. We are going to get Shannon Q. I'm going to ask her if Shannon will do the next episode. Try to get her on tomorrow or
That'd be awesome.
someday. And I want her response to this exact thing.
I
And I
love
haven't
her.
even heard it yet, but I'm already like, let's do this. Sorry, go ahead, Cece.
No, I think he's just going to go along the same lines. Like the brains don't operate the way we assumed. Okay, who cares? Like, let's see what it says.
Epileptic focus would begin in one hemisphere of the brain and travel through the corpus callosum, which is a bundle of fibers connecting the two hemispheres, and cause a generalized seizure. It was recognized by surgeons in the mid-20th century that if you cut the fiber bundle that connected the two hemispheres of the brain, that you could prevent the seizures from becoming generalized, and you could greatly improve the quality of the patient's life. So a number of patients had this operation called corpus callosotomy. It's an operation that I've performed and that many neurosurgeons have performed. And surprisingly, after the operation, the patients, their seizures would get better, of course, but they really weren't much different. That is, that their brains were essentially cut in half, but they still seemed to be a unitary person. They still seemed to be fairly normal. Sperry was a neuroscientist who studied these people in detail, and he did find that there were some subtle abnormalities as a result of cutting the brain in half. But the abnormalities were very subtle. They were so subtle that the experiments he did won him the Nobel Prize.
Pause it.
But they weren't.
Again,
It
this
seemed
doesn't
like he was
point-
hand waving that away, by the way.
This isn't pointing to anything other than we don't have a very clear understanding of the way in which brains work. Like we know that you do enough brain damage, somebody's personality definitely gets changed. Like we have examples of like Merleau-Ponty, the famous French phenomenologist. A lot of his philosophy was based on studying people with brain damage and seeing how their perception of the world was drastically different because their brains were affected in such a way. Like, yeah, maybe they weren't affected in that one instance because of the way in which what the operation was, but we have countless examples of people with brain damage whose personality changed drastically, almost became the opposite of what they used to be. So it just depends on what we're talking about. The fact that we don't have a full grasp of what is localized where, or if you change certain things, other things don't change or whatever. That's not an argument for materialism being. It's not defeated for materialism even remotely.
Well, it's also not. It's not substantiating the separate claim of whatever other substance it is. But
yeah, he just.
Well, I guess by default, maybe you just make the claim that it's just a dichotomy there. But still, I mean, I'm not on your token. I don't see that claim being like. That's fine that you can like have intuitive perspectives on what's going on there, but I'm not really seeing like I'm not seeing like what's being generated as like the predictive outcome, right? Like that seems to be like what you would expect whenever you have this idea, especially when it's fringe in the view of science, right? It seems like you would need that behind it. You don't just get this pass of not having it. I want to address this really quickly. Eddie, I did the exact same fucking thing, dude. Like I made I kept like, so I talked to Jack, I talked to Danny, I talked to like 13 different people, and at some point was like, hey, well, I want to read. I got through my catalog of books. What's Bill's last name? Bill space Grommy. I can't find anything. I keep Googling it. No,
we're still gonna get
His
Danny
name
wrong,
is
by the way.
Akil Bilgrami. So the way it's spelled, I'll put it in the chat. I did the same fucking thing. So I feel validated. Like I feel like I don't feel like an idiot anymore because I like Eddie. Eddie's clearly not a fucking idiot. And Eddie's like, hey, what's Bill's last name? You keep mentioning him. And did the same thing. I thought the dude's name was Bill Space Grommy. No, it's just his last name is just Bill Grommy. So yeah, I did the same fucking thing. So yeah. So I feel validated by that comment. Thank you, Eddie.
All right, let's skip playing.
Weren't obvious.
I let
They
my
weren't
cat
obvious
out.
changes. And what that implies is that the human mind is not purely generated by the matter of the brain. Otherwise,
doesn't.
cutting the brain in half would have profound effects
That's
on
not
the
what
human mind. It might make two people.
That's one. Cutting the brain does have drastic effects. It just depends on where the brain damage is. And second, it doesn't imply what he wants to be the case. Like, all right, keep playing. This guy's.
Yeah, I gotta cut it here soon. Do you want to just do this last bit on this section, and then we'll do the scientific evidence 3, and we'll finish the video.
Yeah. Do you think you can get Shannon Q to
it
do this video?
Depends on her schedule, but I think if she's free, I think she'd do it. I mean, it seems like she would.
How about figure it out? Let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but you know,
sure.
I'm sure she wouldn't have any issues if available. So she did it before, so be like, hey, remember that time you were really cool and you came on and made us look cooler? You want to do it again?
Certainly, it would create a rather profound difference in a person's state of consciousness, and it doesn't. You can cut the brain in half, and the person can't tell the difference except that he has fewer seizures. There are some subtle differences, but the differences can only be detected.
I don't really care about the anecdotal, aspects. I just want to know what the actual.
There are examples of people with concussions who have their entire personalities changed. Like this guy's completely delusional.
Yeah, it's like so, and I've been very tempted with arguments, but for me, it's like I always just kind of go back to like problems with hitting. If I just like grabbed a bat and hit myself in the fucking head with it as hard as I could, like clearly alters my consciousness, and it just seems to like I just take the Graham Oppie approach that if I'm gonna explain the phenomena in virtue of what we know, I don't see the leg up on the other positions in these types of explanations, though I'm very sympathetic and borderline convinced on issues with intentional states and the reduction. I'm just in limbo of whether or not that's a non-reductive form of physicalism, or whether or not I should just be remain a skeptic or wherever I should be. But none of that's like going to put me overboard on some ontology just in virtue of like a lack of a generated prediction in the future, like a novel prediction or something that you would expect. The only argument I can see towards that is just to say, look, that's not the only way we should gain knowledge, and that's fine. But I just I need some like clearly it's not going to be some a priori argument, right? Like we're going to have experience of the world, right, to adjudicate what the substance is. So it's like every turn I get to, it's like it seems like a lot of work that the other positions in philosophy of mind haven't really bothered to actually do. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Whereas I'm okay with the speculative cases. I'm okay with the thing that's come get me the closest to abandoning physicalism isn't like rhetoric like what Egnor's spewing. It's like rule following considerations or just considerations of reduction, like with what Akil points out in self-knowledge and resentment. But I don't really know anything other than that's persuaded me, and I don't think like merely citing your testimony on how people feel can suffice to like an actual theory of what you're offering there, right? But
Yeah.
maybe that's just long-winded to say.
By the way,
Sounds like a bunch of horse shit from the way you say it, Egnor, and not from the way other people.
everybody should go follow Brute Facts podcast. Eddie, thank you for your donation.
He's about to have Lance Bush on.
Oh, cool.
So
we should have him back as well. And
yeah,
we should have Danny.
I've been talking to Lance. I want him on. It's just I didn't realize he wasn't as into the philosophy of mind and stuff. I wanted to get his perspective. And so
we need to get Danny on. I was trying that a while back. Oh, Mike, is there? He just disappeared. Can you guys hear me? Let me know if you can still hear me. Mike disappeared from. Yeah, I don't know what just happened. His internet might have freaked out. If it's not one, it's the other. Oh, well, anyway, we're about to hit the 2-hour mark anyway. I'll give Mike a couple minutes to see if he's able to get back on, but there we go. Well, maybe he'll be back in a second, but anyway, thanks again, guys, for following and liking and subscribing and everything. I think we're gonna see because I would love to go over that entire video, especially if Shannon Q could join us, because I think that she would add a lot of value to the conversation. I also have a couple of other videos of materialism that I want to go over that I think are interesting to take a look at. I'm not sure what happened to Mike here. Maybe his internet crashed. I know they were about to do some work at his house. That might be what's going on. So Theo asks, are you both materialists? I think so. I think Mike is more agnostic on that issue. I think that he has certain intuitions about the role of language that are quite different than mine. So I think he has a real issue with, how would I say it? Like, I'm a materialist, but I'm a little bit of a weird materialist in the sense that I don't think a physical description of things is complete. I agree with the criticisms on that point. But I don't think that is a defeater for materialism. I think that can be answered by looking at the role of language and subjective limitations as being the reasons for experience not being able to be encapsulated by language in that way. We go into more detail in the beginning. Mike just messaged me and said that his computer kicked him off to do a Windows update all of a sudden. So I'm going to ask him if he's going to come back on, maybe through his phone. But so I guess I would say, I don't even know if the word non-reductive physicalist applies, because I think the non-reductive physicalists are still holding to some kind of ontological difference there.
Dude, that was so lame.
Well, your computer?
It shut it down to do a Windows update. I was like, no. You want to update to Windows 11? No, motherfucker, I don't want to update to Windows 11. So I had to skip that. That was extremely fucking rude, Windows. Sorry about that.
Well, anyway, we're hitting the 2-hour mark anyway. So
yeah, no worries. Yeah, I got to get rolling for sure. So, Oh, let me address this. He knows material theorists. Yeah, so if you want theoretically, I can just here, I'll just put it up on the screen. So that way it's not like go do this. I'll just show. Gospel truth, physicalism. Here we go. All right, so I'm gonna share something on my screen. The entailed position. Yeah, Bernardo Kastrup is atheist as well. Here's another example on the opposite spectrum. So now that Eddie did half the work for me, here's the other half of the work. Right? You can go watch this debate. I'm not saying this debate just like proves it, but this guy right here, Thomas Christensen, ironically, he's a Christian. He's a physicalist. He argues in this debate against Kyle, which Kyle's a cool guy. I've talked to him before, who's an idealist. So yeah, it's not exclusive. Like you can be a Christian or a theist, and you could be a physicalist. You can be an atheist and be an idealist. Now, I think Oppie's objection to idealism absent a God is a really good objection in that you don't really have explanation because you don't have things, you don't account for the cause of the minds that are fundamental. Therefore, you don't have the explanation for them. So you're not really providing some explanation for the experiential phenomena in the first place. Whereas the theistic idealist is going to say like, you can just root that to God or something. But no, Kyle is an idealist Christian. I believe he's a Christian. But the point wasn't him. The point was the other guy, Thomas. He's a Christian physicalist. I think Craig is a physicalist too, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Craig?
I just know he knows God. He thinks God's a concrete object. He's not. He's a nominalist. He wrote a book about like the issues of Platonism for Christianity and or theism, I think in general, if I'm not mistaken.
Craig makes me tired.
Sure. But anyway, let's get cutting it. I got to roll out.
You gotta work.
But yeah, you can be an atheist and a dualist. Danny's one. You can be a Christian, or an atheist and an idealist. There's several of them.
Wait, I gotta bring Danny on because I want to have the conversation about dualism.
Yeah, Theo. Look into Craig's position. He's a nominalist. I'm pretty sure he thinks God's a concrete object, right? I think that's the term that he would use.
Are you sure he's a nominalist? Because I
100% a nominalist. 100%.
Okay.
He's definitely not a Platonist. Like he wrote a book about it. Yeah, well, Danny's a dualist. Danny has been a really good source for me. Like I asked him for some sources and stuff that I've been reading. So
I want to have him on really badly because I find his position, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I really want to have him on.
Bread of Life, nice.
I want to have him on to talk about it.
He's a really good guy. I mean, I think he goes to LSU. For philosophy, you go to philosophy. You guys would have a lot in common. I mean,
I don't think as far as our belief systems, we have a lot in common from what I've heard him say.
No, yeah, no, not like that. I mean, but yeah.
Maybe we can.
I guess I'm just at the point where I'm so open to other positions, as long as there's good consideration to argue. The second I get some like motivated kind of reasoning or perspective behind it, then I'm kind of drawn away from it. Just to cap the episode with Egnor, right? It just seems clearly motivated to me. But
well, let's see. Get back to me about whether or not Shannon can join us because I would love to finish the video at some point.
Sure.
All right. Well, with that, thanks everybody for joining us today. Please like and subscribe and all the usual stuff. Patreon.com/accidental-trial. Now I'm on TikTok. I'm under Cease to Know. TikTok.
Yes, Cease is on TikTok. Give him a follow.
I remain of the opinion that that app is mostly cancer,
It is.
but I'm trying to post videos pretty
Get them
regularly
to
there.
1,000. We can go.
Yeah,
You can
please.
go live and bring more viewers to the show. So,
But yeah.
yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. I want to at least let anyone in the future or right now that's watching. We sometimes will say expect this on part. Expect the other part for part 2. If something pops up, sorry, we just go with that. So we do apologize if you've gone through the archives and go. They were supposed to do several different parts on videos. We're well aware.
We'll always go back and
if someone really wants us to go back and we didn't finish it, you just let us leave us a comment. We'll see it amongst the comments. We read all the comments, and we'll definitely tend to any viewers' need. So let us know. Thank you to Brute, Fax, Eddie, everybody else. Go subscribe. CJ, Theo, Danny, Physics Police. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody. Yeah. Anyway, guys, peace out. We love you.
see you next time.
Peace. Well, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to sign off yet.
Oh, it's only you click it. I can do it from here.
Well, so there's this thing. It's called. I'll have to explain it to you in like layman terms. Ready? So it's hard to elucidate on. It's called I'm really dumb and don't know where buttons are. Peace out.